In this lesson, we'll introduce CSS modules in React. A CSS module is a regular CSS file, except that it ends with an extension of .module.css. And then when we import the CSS file into a JavaScript component file like app.js right here, we're actually going to get access to a styles object which we can utilize as a regular JavaScript object in line to apply classes. So I know that can be a little bit of a complex description, so let's see it in action, and I promise it'll make much more sense. The advantage of CSS modules is that they prevent the kind of style pollution that we saw a couple lessons ago, where, for example, when we import a CSS file directly, like we're doing right here on line number 2, we saw that that could accidentally introduce styles into the app that would apply to all other components all other elements that utilized a specific CSS class, or even something like an element selector. A CSS module helps solve this problem with one type of solution. So let me show you how it works. I'm going to open up my File Explorer, and here we have our app.css file, which has the component styles for this component, and I'm going to change its extension to .module.css. So app.module.css. It must have this extension so that Webpack can understand it as a CSS module. So I'm going to save that file. You'll notice the app is going to break on the right-hand side, but that's totally fine. And the next thing I want to do is I want to open up this file just to remind you that we have all of our CSS classes here, and also remind you that in JavaScript, we don't actually have support for dashes when it comes to things like object property names. Technically, we might be able to get away with it if we do the square bracket syntax and reference an object property as a string. But just to make what we're about to do a little bit easier, what I want to do is change all these CSS class names so they use camel case notation, so a capital second letter, rather than using any kind of dash. So for example, for this CSS class of app logo, I'm just going to change that to app logo. And again, we'll see why this is advantageous in just a moment. So down here on line 11, I will change this to app logo as well. Here, I will change this to app header, like so. Down here, we will change this to app link. And we actually do not need to update this keyframe right here because this is simply being referenced up here in this CSS property. We're not going to be utilizing this in our file. So once you've made those changes to the names, we can save the file and go back to our JS file. So as I mentioned, we are no longer going to be importing our styles like so, because now the CSS module file is going to give us access to a styles object. So there's two things we need to change here on this line. The first is we updated the file name to be app.module.css. And now the second thing is, rather than just simply importing the file like so, we're going to treat it almost like it's a regular JavaScript file import that's giving us a default export. So we have access to a special exported object from this file. We can call it whatever we want. And typically the name you're going to use here is styles. So I'm going to say import styles from the CSS file. This is going to be a little bit unconventional, right? Because we are using this regular JavaScript import syntax with a CSS file. But that is the beauty of CSS modules. They enable this exact kind of behavior, and Webpack makes it all possible. So styles is going to be a regular JavaScript object like so, and the properties on that object are going to be the CSS classes that we defined in the module file. So for example, if I go back to app.module.css, we have app and app logo here. So we're actually going to have properties on this object like app and app logo. And we are welcome to reference those properties in line and provide them for our class name attribute. So let me show you how that's going to work. We're just going to move from the top to bottom of this file. So for example, here in my logo component, here's my class name where we were previously referencing the app logo CSS class using a string. Now what I'm going to do is reference a property on this object. And since it is an object, remember we need to be in JavaScript land, so we need to provide a pair of curly braces in JSX. So right here, we're going to remove app logo. We're going to provide our curly braces. Here, I'm going to reference styles. And on that object, as a reminder, I'm going to have all the CSS classes from that module CSS file. So I'm going to have app logo, right? I'm going to have this thing right here available, right? That's the reason why I removed the hyphens. That's because in JavaScript, syntax like this is not valid because JavaScript will not recognize the dash or the hyphen. That's why I updated those CSS class names in that file. So that's just one example, and we can apply this exact same logic to all of our other classes throughout the file. So for example, here in our link component, we're using the class name of app link. We still keep class name, but now we're going to remove this string, provide the JSX syntax, then reference our styles object and reference app link, like so. Moving on down, here we have our header and the class is app header. So right here, once again, replace this with an object and styles.appHeader. Make sure the name is what it should be. Scroll down, right here we have class name of app. One more time, I'm going to change this to an object and do styles.app. And now you can see on the right-hand side, our app is back to normal. It looks exactly as it did originally. I want to show you as well that we have solved our pollution problem. So as an example, if you remember, if I scroll down, because it's hidden, we have that additional link right here of some link. And if I go back to my starter file, which I think right here is in index.js, here is where we are adding that hyperlink. Now, technically, our class name is no longer app-link. It's going to be app link right now. But it doesn't matter what it is because you'll notice the styles from the actual app link class in the CSS module are not being applied, right? So as a reminder, if we go into app link right here, it's setting that bluish color that we see right here. Notice that that bluish color is not being applied to this hyperlink, which means that this app link CSS class is not polluting. It's not accidentally escaping this module. It's not accidentally creating a side effect for any other element that happens to use the class name of app link. That's because CSS modules are self-contained. Whenever we want to use their styles, we have to import them in the specific JavaScript file or component file where we want to use them, like so, and we get that styles object with those CSS classes as properties. Since we need to do that approach, since these styles are now contained, that's where the module name comes from. A module is like a container, right? That's kind of enclosed around these styles and preventing them from escaping. This CSS class is now irrelevant. It's not actually going to apply any styles because AppLink no longer exists as a global CSS style. It only exists as a CSS class within this module file, which must be imported wherever it is to be used. So this is one way that we can solve the pollution problem in React, but it's one of several, right? So we're going to explore a couple throughout the course of this section, but that is a quick introduction to CSS modules. As a reminder, you have to change your CSS file name to include .module.css. You have to make sure that the class names themselves are available to be referenced as properties on an object. The easiest way to do that is to just use upper camel case. And then when you import the actual module file into a component file, you'll have access to a default object. You can call it whatever name you want. The traditional name here is styles. And then you simply reference those CSS classes as properties on that regular styles JavaScript object. That's all there is to cover in this lesson. So I will see you in the next one.